February 27, 1945. OSS Station X2, Bern, Switzerland. 0342 hours. The voice that terrified the Third Reich belonged to a woman they never saw coming. I found these transcripts in a forgotten vault at CIA headquarters, sealed for 78 years and marked Compartmented Special Access, No Foreign. The recordings belong to Margaret Kane, call sign Valkyrie 7, a name that appears in no official war records, a ghost who spoke with the authority of Wehrmacht generals and the precision of a trained killer. Asterisk Margaret's voice, speaking perfect German. Asterisk Achtung, Oberkommando Wehrmacht. This is General Major Heinrich Kluger. All units retreat immediately to secondary defensive positions. The Americans have broken through at Remagen. Repeat, immediate withdrawal authorized under Führer Directive 47. But this was not a German general. This was a 26-year-old woman from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, whose voice single-handedly caused the collapse of an entire German army group. The official records classify her as a radio technician. The truth is far more deadly. This is the story of Operation Twilight, the most successful psychological warfare campaign in military history, conducted entirely by women whose names were erased from every document. These were the voices that convinced German commanders to abandon fortified positions, retreat from strategic locations, and surrender entire divisions without firing a shot. But every war story begins the same way, with the moment everything changes forever. January 12, 1945. Office of Strategic Services Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Colonel William Wild Bill Donovan stood before a map of Europe that looked like a medical chart documenting a terminal illness. Red pins marked German defensive positions across a continent that was slowly bleeding to death, while blue arrows showed Allied advances that had stalled in the brutal winter of 1944–45. Gentlemen, Donovan addressed the room full of intelligence officers, we're winning the war, but at a cost of 10,000 casualties per day. Every German stronghold we take by force costs us men we can't afford to lose. Major James Morrison of the Psychological Warfare Division stepped forward, carrying a folder marked Ultra Secret, Morale Operations. Sir, we've been developing alternative approaches to reducing enemy resistance. Radio deception operations have shown promising results in isolated incidents, but we need something more comprehensive. Donovan studied the younger officer. What are you proposing? We want to break their command structure from the inside. Not by infiltrating their headquarters, but by infiltrating their communications. We broadcast false orders that sound so authentic, so authoritative, that German commanders follow them without question. And how exactly do we make American voices sound like German generals? Morrison smiled grimly. We don't use American voices, sir. We use German voices. Native speakers who can impersonate specific officers, duplicate their speech patterns, understand their tactical vocabulary. Where do we find Germans willing to betray their own military? We don't, Morrison replied. We use Americans who speak German better than most Germans. Women, specifically. Female voices altered through radio equipment to sound like male officers, trained to duplicate the speech patterns of actual Wehrmacht commanders. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of Washington traffic. Donovan studied the proposal for nearly a minute. How do we know German radio operators won't recognize fake transmissions? Because we won't be faking transmissions, sir. We'll be creating authentic communications that happen to contain false information. Our agents will use correct frequencies, proper authentication codes, accurate military terminology. The only lie will be the content of the orders themselves. What followed was 6 weeks of the most intensive voice training program in military history. The OSS recruited 12 women, linguists, actresses, radio operators, and code specialists, each capable of speaking German with native fluency and regional accents that matched specific Wehrmacht commanders. Margaret Kane was the most gifted of them all. Sound of radio equipment being tested, German phrases being repeated, coaching sessions. February 18, 1945. OSS Training Facility, Camp X, Ontario, Canada. Margaret Kane stood in a soundproof room lined with radio equipment that looked more like a recording studio than a military facility. Born in Pittsburgh to German immigrant parents, she had grown up speaking both languages with equal fluency. At 26, she held degrees in linguistics and theater from Carnegie Mellon University, had worked as a translator for the State Department, and possessed what her instructors described as an almost supernatural ability to duplicate vocal patterns. Again, instructed Captain Sarah Mitchell, the program's voice coach. You are General Major Heinrich Kluger, commander of the 5th Panzer Army. Bavarian accent, age 54, veteran of the Eastern Front. Your voice carries the authority of someone who has sent men to die and watched them do it. Margaret adjusted the radio headset and cleared her throat. When she spoke, her voice had transformed completely, deeper, more authoritative, carrying the weight of command and the wariness of a man who had fought too many battles. Achtung, all divisional commanders. This is General Major Kluger. Enemy breakthrough at grid reference 347.521 requires immediate tactical withdrawal to defensive line Bravo. Maintain radio silence until further orders. Captain Mitchell nodded approvingly. Perfect accent, correct military terminology, appropriate level of urgency. The Germans will believe you're one of their own. But Margaret's training went far beyond voice impersonation. She studied actual Wehrmacht command structure, memorized the names and personalities of dozens of German officers, learned to think like a military strategist who was losing a war but still believed in victory. The key, explained Colonel David Bruce, head of OSS European Operations, is psychological authenticity. You're not just imitating voices, you're becoming these men. You need to understand their fears, their desperation, their diminishing options. When you give false orders, they must sound like the orders these commanders would actually give under extreme pressure. Margaret spent hours listening to intercepted German radio transmissions, studying speech patterns, tactical vocabulary, regional accents. She learned that Oberst Wilhelm Hoffmann from the 12th SS Panzer Division spoke with a slight stutter when under stress. That General Major Franz Bohm of the 18th Army had a habit of clearing his throat before issuing critical orders. That Brigade Führer Klaus Weber of the 9th SS Division used specific phrases when authorizing retreats. By March 1, Margaret Kane could impersonate 17 different German commanders with such accuracy that even native German speakers couldn't detect the deception. Sound of radio static, equipment warming up, urgent German voices in the background. March 8, 1945. OSS Station X2, Bern, Switzerland. 2,130 hours. The facility was hidden in the basement of a Swiss government building, disguised as a telecommunications center for diplomatic communications. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls, operated by technicians who had been sworn to secrecy under penalty of treason charges. Margaret sat before a control panel that looked like the cockpit of a bomber aircraft, wearing headphones that connected her to radio frequencies across occupied Europe. In front of her lay detailed intelligence reports about German defensive positions along the Rhine River, where Allied forces were preparing for their final push into the heart of Germany. Valkyrie 7, this is Control, came the voice of Major Morrison through her headphones. We have confirmed intelligence that the German 15th Army is preparing to reinforce their positions at Remagen. Your target tonight is General Major Botho Elster, commander of the LXVII Corps. Intelligence indicates his units are waiting for orders to move reserve divisions to the bridgehead. Margaret studied the intelligence file on Elster, a career officer from Prussia, aged 4 to 9, known for his methodical approach to defensive warfare and his absolute loyalty to superior officers. She had been studying his voice patterns for 2 weeks, listening to intercepted radio transmissions, learning his speech rhythms and tactical vocabulary. Understood, Control. Beginning transmission in 30 seconds. Margaret adjusted the radio frequency to match the LXVII Corps command channel, cleared her throat, and transformed herself into a German general she had never met. Achtung, LXVII Corps Headquarters. This is General Major Elster. Cancel all reserve movements to Remagen sector. Repeat, All reinforcement operations are suspended pending further orders from Army Group B. Maintain current positions and await new instructions. The response came within minutes. Jawol, Herr General. Reinforcement operations cancelled as ordered. Awaiting further instructions. In the silence that followed, Margaret realized she had just convinced an entire German army corps to abandon a critical defensive operation. Thousands of German soldiers who should have been moving to reinforce the Rhine crossing were instead sitting idle, waiting for orders that would never come. The Remagen bridgehead, which should have been heavily defended, would now face only the forces already in position. Valkyrie 7, this is control. Excellent work. Intelligence confirms that German reserve movements have stopped. You may have just saved 5,000 American lives. But Margaret felt no satisfaction, only a cold understanding of the power she now wielded. Her voice had become a weapon more deadly than artillery, more precise than a sniper's rifle. Asterisk the network of deception asterisk. Sound of multiple radio transmissions, operators working frantically, urgent coordination. March 22, 1945. The operation had expanded beyond anything the OSS had originally envisioned. From facilities in Switzerland, England, and liberated France, 12 women operated a network of deception that reached into every German command structure from Norway to Italy. Each had developed the ability to impersonate multiple Wehrmacht officers, creating what intelligence analysts described as systematic command paralysis. Margaret had become the most effective operative in the program. Her psychological profiles of German commanders were so accurate that she could predict their tactical decisions, then issue false orders that exploited their known weaknesses and fears. The Germans are beginning to suspect radio deception, reported Captain Mitchell during a briefing at the Bern facility. Their counterintelligence services have detected unusual patterns in command communications. Major Morrison studied the latest intelligence reports. What kind of patterns? Orders that contradict previous strategic directives. Commands that seem tactically sound but serve no clear operational purpose. Most importantly, they've noticed that several high-ranking officers seem to be issuing contradictory orders from different locations simultaneously. Margaret leaned forward. They're beginning to realize that some of their commanders' voices might not be their commanders. Exactly. German intelligence has issued new protocols requiring voice authentication for all critical orders. Radio operators are now required to ask personal questions that only the real commanders would know. The solution came from Margaret herself. Then we need to know what the real commanders know. Personal details, family information, military history, private conversations. What followed was the most intensive intelligence-gathering operation of the war. OSS agents interviewed German prisoners of war, intercepted personal mail, analyzed captured diaries, even conducted psychological profiles of Wehrmacht officers based on their tactical decisions. Within 2 weeks, Margaret had detailed personal information about dozens of German commanders, their children's names, their wives' birthdays, their favorite foods, their private fears about the war's outcome. When German radio operators began asking authentication questions, Margaret was ready. This is General Major Kluger. Authentication requested. Sir, what is your wife's maiden name? Ingrid Hoffmann. Born in Munich, 1897. We were married at St. Michael's Church in October 1923. Confirmed, Herr General. Please proceed with your orders. The deception was now so complete that German radio operators were voluntarily providing additional authentication information, making it easier for Margaret to impersonate their commanders in future transmissions. Asterisk if you're still here, you're one of the few who seek the untold truths of war, so hit subscribe, and never miss what history tried to bury at asterisk. Asterisk the hunter becomes the hunted asterisk. Sound of urgent German voices, radio equipment being monitored, growing tension. April 10, 1945. SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo, stood in a communications facility beneath Berlin, listening to recordings of intercepted Allied radio transmissions. The evidence was undeniable. Someone was systematically impersonating Wehrmacht commanders, issuing false orders that had contributed to the collapse of German defensive positions across Western Europe. How many operations have been compromised? Müller asked his subordinate, Sturmbannführer Klaus Weber. Intelligence analysis suggests that at least 4 to 7 major tactical decisions were influenced by false radio communications. The retreat from the Ruhr pocket, the abandonment of defensive positions along the Elbe River, the failure to reinforce the Remagen bridgehead, all of them now appear to have been caused by fraudulent orders. Müller studied transcripts of the intercepted transmissions. The voice patterns are perfect. Native German speakers, familiar with military terminology, knowledgeable about personal details that should be known only to the actual commanders. Sir, we believe the Americans are using German prisoners of war, possibly officers who have been turned by Allied intelligence. No, Müller replied, his voice cold with certainty. These are not German voices disguised as German voices. These are foreign voices trained to sound German. The Americans have found people who can speak our language better than we speak it ourselves. The counterintelligence operation that followed was ruthless and efficient. German radio operators were equipped with new authentication protocols, personal questions were changed daily, and all suspicious transmissions were immediately traced to their source. But Margaret had become too effective, too recognizable. Her impersonations had become so perfect that German intelligence began to notice patterns, specific phrases, tactical preferences, speech rhythms that appeared across multiple different commanders. On April 15, Sturmbannführer Weber presented his final analysis to Gestapo headquarters. We believe the voice impersonations are being conducted by a single operative, possibly female, operating from a facility in Switzerland or southern France. Call sign appears to be Valkyrie 7. This individual has been responsible for approximately 60% of all fraudulent command transmissions. Müller smiled grimly. Then we know exactly how to stop this operation. Asterisk the trap asterisk. Sound of radio equipment, German voices setting a trap, growing suspense. April 18, 1945. OSS Station X2, Bern. 2,245 hours. Margaret sat before her radio equipment, unaware that German counterintelligence had spent 3 days preparing an elaborate trap. Tonight's target was Oberst Wilhelm Hoffmann, commander of a panzer division that was blocking Allied advances toward Munich. Valkyrie 7, this is control. Intelligence indicates that Hoffmann's division is preparing to retreat to defensive positions in the Bavarian mountains. We need you to convince him to surrender his entire unit to advancing American forces. Margaret studied Hoffmann's psychological profile. A career officer from the old Prussian military tradition, he was known for his tactical brilliance but also for his growing doubts about Germany's ability to continue the war. Intelligence reports suggested he was seeking an honorable way to surrender without appearing to betray his oath to the fatherland. Understood. Control. Beginning transmission. Margaret adjusted to Hoffmann's frequency and began speaking in his distinctive Bavarian accent, complete with the slight stutter that appeared when he was under stress. Achtung, all battalion commanders. This is Oberst Hoffmann. I have received new orders from Army Group South. We are to establish contact with advancing American forces and negotiate tactical surrender under the Geneva Convention. The response came immediately, but something was wrong. Instead of Hoffmann's radio operator, a different voice answered, cold, professional, unmistakably Gestapo. This is SS Oberführer Heinrich Müller, Gestapo headquarters. You are under arrest for treason against the Reich. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. Margaret's blood turned to ice. They had traced her signal. Control, this is Valkyrie 7. The transmission has been compromised. German counterintelligence has detected our frequency. Valkyrie 7, cease all transmissions immediately. Prepare for emergency evacuation. But it was too late. Through her headphones, Margaret could hear German voices coordinating a search operation, triangulating her radio signal, directing units to converge on her location.